any period of time and listened to me teach ever in the last 4 years since I've been here, you've probably heard me talk about Kyle a little bit. Kyle and I were a little bit, inseparable in high school. He and I, we grew up playing the same sports and doing all the same stuff. But as we got into high school, we had different interests as far as sports went. He focused more on baseball and soccer. I focused more on basketball. And he and I overlapped with choir though. And so he and I got to do youth group stuff. We got to hang out in other ways. We also worked at Chick-fil-A together. And then almost every weekend when I was in high school, once I got my driver's license, I was over at his house. Right, he had a lot of land, lots of acreage where we could ride four-wheelers, do a bunch of stupid stuff that if we had been supervised, we wouldn't have been allowed to do. One time he got the wind knocked out of him because we were trying to race the four-wheelers, and he crashed and knocked the wind out of himself, and I laughed, and it was awesome because that was the kind of friendship that we had. And we would stay up till 2 in the morning every Friday, and then I would sleep over at his house. We'd get up. He had a pool table, ping pong. We were pretty evenly matched at pool. He would always beat me in ping pong because I'm not good at ping pong. But we would always, though, every time we got together, bring out our guitars, and we would try to learn new stuff together, and we would work on harmonies. We would work on just anything. We did a lot of just random shows that we would do as well. And so we like to come up with our own stuff and do, and it was just a lot of fun. Kyle and I spent a lot of time together. In fact, we still keep in touch today. And he was in my wedding. We've been lifelong friends. I met him when I was 4 years old in preschool. So he's one of those lifelong friends that I've just always had. I can't imagine my life without Kyle. And likewise, I can't imagine life without Kyle's family. Because I was over at his house all the time, I was really close to his family too. And so a lot of times they even told me on several occasions, you're like another son to us, and I was always welcome to their pantry and eat anything, and we did every weekend if we weren't bringing home leftover Chick-fil-A from work after closing. And we would, they would invite me on vacations. So twice when I was in high school, the only times I had actually been out of the country at that point was to the Bahamas, because I went on a cruise with their family and another family from our school. And so their family was kind of like my family. And you guys have people like that in your life where it's they're not really your family, but your family. People who aren't blood related to you, but would claim you as family. Maybe you've had that experience, and maybe you think somebody else's family is better than your family, right? And sometimes, all of us, we sometimes, if we spend a lot of time in any other family other than our own, then we have this thought occasionally. Is I think their family is better than mine. I like hanging out with them more than my own family, right? And sometimes we get to that point. All of us have felt like someone else's family is perfect compared to ours, right? Because the reality is, in our own family, we know all the quirks, the hang-ups. My brothers and I have, to this day, very complete different interests. And so growing up, we just had a hard time connecting. And I felt like, Kyle was more like a brother to me because we connected in a lot of ways. It was like he was family to me. And all of us, we sometimes, no matter how good our family is, because I had a great family growing up, when we spend a lot of time with other people, or if we get connected to other people, we can be tempted to compare and think, well, I wish my family was more like that. I wish my family was more like that. And anybody's family can sometimes look perfect compared to ours. You've probably noticed that sometimes it seems like other families have stuff going for them that you don't, right? However you feel about your family. I mean, there's times I loved my family, but sometimes I wish they were more like that family. Or I loved my family in this aspect, but I wish they were more like that in that other aspect. And we all sometimes wrestle with these tensions because no family is perfect. Maybe you thought that about a family on TV. Maybe you thought about that of a friend's family, or maybe just another family in the neighborhood or apartment complex where you just, you see them all the time and you think, wow, I kind of wish my family had something in common with that. But the reality is, and I think we all know this, because none of us are perfect, right? All of us have made mistakes. We've done things we're not proud of. All of us have, occasionally gotten a B, right? And so we know, because of our own imperfection, that families can't be perfect either, because families are made up of imperfect people, and therefore families are imperfect. No family is perfect. Every family has its hiccups and its hang-ups, and no family is even close to perfect. Your family and my family will never be able to provide everything that we need in life. It feels like they should a lot of times because they're family, right? But the reality is no family, your family, my family, no family will be able to ever give you everything that you need at all times. Now, sometimes that's not a big deal because we understand that. We've got other people in our lives that kind of make up the difference. But for some of us, that's a tough pill to swallow. That we can't depend on our family in all situations. Sometimes our family just lets us down, don't they? It's tough, but it's the reality because no family is perfect. Sometimes your family will let you down. And I know no family sets out to do that, but sometimes that's part of life. But what if God wants to and can give you more family? That's kind of really the question we're going to focus in on this week, is what if God could and does give you more family? And how does that look if that's the case? And what I love about the Bible is that it is not perfect. And in this sense, let me explain that. It's not perfect in the sense that everybody in the Bible is not perfect. In fact, the Bible is full of pretty crazy people that God ends up using for his purposes. People that in Hebrews 11, it's known as the faith chapter in the New Testament, where he recounts all the people of faith throughout the history of God's people and talks about their faith. It's called the faith chapter in Hebrews chapter 11. And every single one of those people that he lists off in that chapter have something about them that was really, really, really imperfect. I mean, David is known as the man after God's own heart. But you know what he did? He cheated on his wife while he was king, and his kingdom basically fell apart from underneath him. Okay? Abraham is known as the father of the faith, but he had lots of issues. All you have to do is read Genesis to figure that out. You know, it's full of people. Rahab is in Hebrews chapter 11. You know what Rahab is known as? It's always, every time you read her in Scripture, it's Rahab the prostitute. She's in Hebrews chapter 11 as this great woman of faith. She's in Jesus' family line. So all the stories in the Bible of people of faith that we look up to, they're always imperfect. But God uses them. I love that because the Bible is full of accounts of normal, unassuming families that God uses to accomplish his will. It's very rarely the family that goes, God, use me, you know. I could be so great. It's usually the person that thinks God can't use me, and God ends up using them. And he makes a powerful story of their lives. And so today we're going to look at a couple of guys from the Old Testament. David is one of them, and it's his friend Jonathan. Now, they have a really interesting dynamic of a friendship because on the surface, they shouldn't ever be friends at all. And here's why. Because when David was a child, Samuel, the prophet of that time, came to David's father, Jesse, and he said, hey, I need to anoint the next king that God has for the nation of Israel. Bring me your sons. And he goes, okay. And then he calls out all his big, good-looking, handsome, strapping sons, and they come out. And Samuel's like, no, none of them. But where's another? Do you have another one? And he didn't even bring out David. He's like, oh, well, I've got David. He's out in the field. He's with the sheep, right? Which is what they did with the crazy outcasts. They're like, oh, they go watch the sheep, right? And Samuel's like, no, that's the one. He sees David, and David is anointed the next king of Israel. Maybe if you've grown up in church, you've heard that story. But Jonathan, here's why it doesn't make sense for them to be friends. Because Jonathan was the son of the current king of Israel, Saul. Now, I don't know if you pay attention much in history, but usually the next king in line for the throne is not some other person God anoints. Usually the next king is who? The son of the current king. And not just any son, but the oldest, right? The oldest son is supposed to get the throne. That's how kingdoms work. Well, not God's kingdom, apparently, because God said, actually, Saul, you're messing things up a little bit because you're not listening to me. You lose the right to the throne in your family line, so I'm going to David. And David was, again, one of those shepherd boys that thought, how could God ever use me? And God chooses him to be king. He was the youngest of all his brothers. And Jonathan, the true heir to the throne, who would have had every reason to look at David as competition and a threat, they ended up being the closest of friends. In fact, here is what 1 Samuel chapter 18 describes of their friendship. after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right? And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Now, I don't know what kind of covenant this was, if this was like a spit shake or a pinky promise, or I don't know how it looked back then, but they have this covenant, they have this agreement. They're not going to fight. They're going to become friends. And they, in the New Testament, when Jesus says, what's the golden rule, right? Love God, then love others, and second is love your neighbor as yourself. Jonathan loved David as himself. And so these two needed each other in a time where they weren't getting much from their families. Okay, so Saul was corrupt. Saul saw David as a threat and wanted to kill him and tries to kill him several times, unsuccessfully, obviously. And David was an outcast. And so Jonathan and David both came from some pretty messed up families, and they needed each other at a time where they weren't getting much from their own families. Can any of you guys relate to that? Where you have people that step into your life and kind of fill in the gaps for where your family can't always. And this is the kind of friendship that they had. Later, Jonathan looked out for David's life. So check this out. This is in chapter 19. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you, and I will tell you what I find out." So basically, Jonathan speaks well of David to his dad, King Saul. And strangely enough, Saul changes his mind. Check this out. In verse 6, it says, Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. Surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Now, unfortunately, that promise doesn't stay kept very long. It isn't long after that Saul gets jealous again, angry, and tries to kill David. And so, but at least Jonathan bought him some time. He was able to kind of calm and talk his dad down. So even though David was taking what would have rightly been Jonathan's heir to the throne, Jonathan looks out for David in a number of ways. First, he cared about David. Second, he looked out for David's life, his future, his well-being. And third, he saw potential in David's life. He believed God when God said that David needed to be the next king. That not only speaks to Jonathan's friendliness, that's the word. Not only does it speak to Jonathan's friendliness, but it speaks to Jonathan's faith. That God is in control and not him. He doesn't become power hungry like his dad. And if you are a person that would call yourself a Jesus follower, you need people who will encourage you in your relationship with God, the way that Jonathan does for David. Do you have people in your life who can encourage you in your walk with God? Do you have friends that are able to do that? Because that's extremely important. And what does this have to do with family? Well, it's kind of like I've said before. We need relationships in our life that will fill in the gaps for us where our family can't. We need people like Jonathan in our lives that can fill in the gaps that our families are unable to do so that we can support each other. And this is actually, there's many reasons that this is how it's supposed to be, but that's one of the reasons that Jesus established the church. Right? If you remember back in this time, in Israel's time, before Jesus came, there was like the Jew, it was like a race thing. The Jews were God's chosen people, the Israelites. But after Jesus, he says, now this is a faith for anybody. And it was before, but honestly, the Israelites just biffed it up at their job to actually go and bring that blessing that God gave them to other people. They just hoarded it for themselves. And Jesus comes, he fulfills what the Israelites were supposed to do. And Jesus establishes the church. The church is, in essence, the very family of God. It's the body of Christ. The church is often referred to as the body of Christ because we are supposed to be a family. We are supposed to be a family. That's why God created the church, a group of people uniquely connected by love to a commitment to Jesus. And if we live our lives the way that he taught, then that's where we find those family elements with our relationships. I love the way that the church is set up to be a family support system for each other. We don't always do good at that because, again, it's made up of imperfect people. And many of us have been hurt by the church at one time or another because the church is made up of imperfect people who make mistakes as well. But by and large, the church has historically always been life-giving. It's not only helped those within the church, within the family of the church, but always been on the forefront of helping others all around the world, all throughout history. Jesus established the church so that we could love one another and help carry one another's burdens, to encourage one another and pray for another. He establishes the church because he knew that we need other people in our lives. So whatever your family looks like, whatever kind of family you have, a family that's larger than our immediate family is always important and necessary, and that's what the church is supposed to do. So think of it this way. It matters to have more people in your life than family. It matters to have more people in your life than your family. And the writer of Hebrews, I mentioned it because of Hebrews chapter 11 earlier, the faith chapter, where he talks about all that. Well, right before he talks about all those people of faith, he talks in Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 24, and he says this. He says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day approaching." The church has never been about a building. If you Google church, then you'll most often find like ancient buildings in Europe, like church buildings, but that's not the church. The church is the people. And that's what it's supposed to be, but sometimes we miss that. We don't meet just out of habit or routine. We meet because we are essential to one another's lives. And this is something that I think we all wrestle with from time to time. But here's the reality. When you have those kinds of family of God relationships in your life, it can actually make your relationships with your own family better. When you have close relationships with people outside your family who are also on the same track of life as you, moving towards Jesus, and you're spurring one another on towards love and good deeds, then it actually helps your own family relationships get better. A lot of times, one of the things I hear a lot in our country, not just from high schoolers or middle schoolers, but from adults as well, something that I hear a lot that I don't think people in the church say in most parts of the world. But I hear people complain, well, I'm not getting anything out of church. Or I'm not getting anything out of that. There's value to be getting something out of church, but we talked a couple weeks ago, there's a season for everything. Sometimes we get a lot out of church because we're in a time of growth, and sometimes we don't get a lot out of it, although I think you can always get something out of the Word. But sometimes it's not about us. In fact, oftentimes, church is not about us. Oftentimes, we're essential because there's other people that need encouragement, that need built up. So sometimes the complaint that, like, I don't get anything out of church, well, I'm sorry, but the church wasn't made for you. I mean, it was, but it also wasn't. It's only half the truth. The church was made for you, but the church was made for you to be for others as well. And the church it's called a congregation. It's where people congregate. It's where people come to meet in order to build one another up and encourage one another, whether you are the one getting encouragement or doing the encouraging. And that's the life-giving opportunity of the church, and that's why God set it up that way. So what does it look like in our lives right now? First of all, I would encourage you to focus on widening your circle, because it matters to have more people than just your family, to have close relationships with people. And sometimes, especially for us introverts, this is difficult. It's incredibly difficult if you're introvert. How many of you are introverts? It's okay, you're introverts. Some of you are not going to raise your hands. But I find it incredibly difficult to get out of my comfort zone and to try to blend in with people that I'm not currently comfortable with. Right? Anybody relate to me? Introverts, are you with me? This is tough. Extroverts, you guys are great because you're just You don't care about awkward. You're like, hey, what's up? How's it going? How's your life? What did you do this week, right? Tell me every detail. And introverts are like, whoa, back off. I don't know you. And so sometimes we have to focus on widening our circle. And even if we're extroverted, sometimes we can tend to drift towards the people who are like us, and we kind of exclude people, maybe by accident. I very rarely think that's an intentional thing. I think it's just we just do that, and we have to fight that sometimes. So focus on widening your circle to the people that not only you can encourage, but people who can encourage you. You have to have people in your life. And secondly, you have to talk about it. So this is the thing that often goes unspoken. Like we meet in small groups every week. We meet together at church every week, but oftentimes we don't actually say out loud, hey, I need somebody in my life to be a Jonathan. I need somebody in my life who will encourage me, who will be there, who will ask me about this and this, and check in on me with this that I'm struggling with. And sometimes we just have to put it out there and be vulnerable for just a little millisecond and say, hey, I'm struggling. I don't feel like I connect well with certain people. I feel like I need to have more godly relationships in my life than I currently have. Maybe it's even like I'm not struggling with anything right now, but I know that I need a family outside of my family for when I do struggle, because everybody struggles at some point. And sometimes you just have to put it out there and say, hey, I'm looking for more Christ-centered community. And that's tough. But that's part of focusing on widening your circle. You got to talk about it and put it out there. So imagine if in the next few years of your life, you focused on these things. You focused on digging in and growing the relationships that matter to you. What if you focused in on growing relationships that you don't currently have at the moment? And then you fast forward in your life a few years from now. Think about the difference that will make in not only not feeling lonely, in not only just having a support system, and not only just having people that you can count on to go have fun and watch a movie with, but in also having people that will catch you when you fall, whether it's by your own doing or the circumstances done to you. Having those people in your life as a safety net, as people that care about you, as people that know you intimately. It's scary, but having those people will make or break your relationships, not only with your peers and with your current family, but with God himself. Those people are so critical and key to have in your life. So it matters to have more people than your family. Ask God to bring those people into your life. That's my challenge for you this week. Family matters, and you can build a bigger one. Let me pray for you guys, and then we'll split up into our small groups.